want meat, cut fresh and dribbling.
Over the many centuries since his death, the life of Sawney Bean became a lightning rod for the fire and brimstone preachers of the church pulpit. It also became a source of grim humour in the public alehouses, and a name barely whispered on the long Scots miles home. All this with good reason. Before his execution at the turn of the 16th century, it was estimated that, with the aid of his wife and children, Sawney Bean washed his hands in the blood of over 1,000 victims. Of course, life didn't have to be this way. Born in East Lothian, Alexander Sawney Bean was expected to work shoulder to shoulder with his father, hedging and ditching, but not finding honest labour to his taste, and untamed by education, he turned his hand to highway robbery. It was said of him he never met a man, woman or child on the open road that he did not kill. At some point he fell in with Agnes Douglas, a suspected witch, who was as viciously inclined as himself, and together they wrought mayhem throughout the lowlands of Scotland. As their crimes began to attract the attention of the king's men, perhaps sensing the tightening noose about their neck, they forsook wintering in the villages along the Ayrshire coast and took up residence in Benane Cave. A fissure cunningly concealed by nature in basalt rock, it was a perfect bolt hole, and it was in these subterranean depths that they first conceived of their most diabolical strategy.
Oh, it's cold out there.
Did you bring any food? I'm famished enough to eat a horse.
My tummy hurts, Dada.
Suppose I told you I brought something almost as tasty as a horse.
What is it, Dada?
It's a surprise, son. Go and play and your mama will call you when it's ready.
What's going on, Sawney? What's that?
I got into a stramash with a stranger and cut off his hand. He ran off before I could even dip his pockets.
Sounds innocent enough, but why did you bring that ugly-looking thing back with you?
On the way home, I got to thinking that a dollop of seaweed and a meaty hand like that would make a nice stew.
Please tell me you're joking, Sawney.
You heard the boy. He's starving. We all are.
I'll play no hand in this. Do you hear me? I'll take nothing to do with it. What are you laughing at? Are you losing your mind?
I'll play no hand in it. You're hysterical, Agnes. Go on. Admit it. It was tastier than you thought.
Aye.
And there's plenty more where that came from.
As the months passed, the local inhabitants began to notice that when the storm tides receded, they left behind the bones of human remains. At first, people thought these were the remnants discarded by wild animals, but as the toll of the dead rose, the superstitious among them became convinced that darker, supernatural forces were at work. The old Celtic belief that fierce, mythical creatures inhabited the deep had not yet disappeared, and offerings were made in an attempt to appease their wrath. In their terror, others turned on outsiders, and several honest travellers were taken up on suspicion and wrongfully hanged upon bare circumstances. When this remedy failed, the frightened natives accused their neighbours and people were executed for no better reason than being the last person to see a victim alive. The whole kingdom became astonished that such villainies could be carried out and the perpetrators not discovered. The land that had rejected the Roman legions of Agricola but gladly embraced the gospel of St. Ninian now seemed cursed by God, and the sickness of the mind captured every living being with wild imaginations. From his dank sanctuary, Sawney could look out at empty beaches and flatter himself that he was the master of all he surveyed. Having lived upwards of 25 years without going into a city, town or village, Sawney's family was at last grown very large, and every branch of it, as soon as was able, assisted in perpetrating their wicked deeds. No sooner had they murdered a victim than they would carry off the carcass to their den, where, cutting it into quarters, they would pickle the mangled limbs and afterwards eat them as quickly as their only sustenance. By this bloody method, they evaded capture and prospered.
Wheesht, everyone, wheesht. Pipe down now. Everybody put a sock in it, or there'll be trouble tonight. Go ahead, son. Thank you, Dada. As you all know, tonight is a special night. It was on this very day, 25 years ago, that Mama and Dada tied the knot. Aye, a knot round some poor beggar's throat. And as is traditional, it's time for them to make their special anniversary request.
Our wish is simple. It's the same as it's been every other year.
Is it flowers, Mama?
No, Petal, it's not for flowers. Tell her, Sawney.
We want meat, cut fresh and dribbling. Go now, and remember well our rules. Cut down no more than 6 men by foot or 2 by horse. Go now, my beauties, and bring home the anniversary feast. Yay!
After enjoying a merry time at the fair, in Girvan, a local fishing port, a cavalryman and his wife were making their way home when they were set upon by a wild crowd storming out from a nearby forest. Sometime after this event, a national magazine known as the Newgate Calendar recorded that the man fought very bravely against them, with sword and pistol, riding some of them down by the main force of his horse. However, in the heat of battle, his poor wife fell from behind him and was instantly murdered before his very eyes. For the female cannibals cut her throat and fell to sucking her blood with as great a gust as if it had been wine. This done, they ripped up her belly and pulled out all of her entrails. When the cavalryman thought himself lost, a large group of revellers, who had also attended the fair, happened upon the scene, and the cannibals, though crazed by bloodlust, had no other recourse but to retreat. Bereft, the man told the whole company what had happened and showed them the horrid spectacle of his wife, whom the murderers had dragged some distance but had not the time to carry her entirely off. Outraged, the revellers were determined to hunt down the fiends who had visited so much horror upon them. But in the fading light, a dense sea fog rolled in, as if conjured by the host of hell himself, and their search had to be abandoned. The following day, the whole county was struck with stupefaction and amazement, and many of them took with the cavalryman to Glasgow, where he told the affair to the provost of that city, who immediately sent to the king concerning it. About 3 or 4 days after, His Majesty himself, riding at the head of 400 soldiers, set out for where this dismal tragedy was acted, in order to search all the rocks and thickets, that if possible, they might apprehend this hellish crew. Once again a thick sea fog rolled in, as if to thwart the searchers, only this time the king's bloodhounds caught the scent of death and instantly set up the most hideous howling and yelping. So that the king, with his attendants, came back to search the cave the locals had thought uninhabitable, as the mouth of the cave was flooded twice a day at high tide. Looking into it, No one could conceive of how any human could live in such a dismal place. Beneath the dying sun, torches were lit, and a great many men ventured in through the most intricate turnings and windings, till at last they arrived at the private recess of these monsters. Legs, arms, thighs, hands, and the feet of men, women, and children were hung up in rows like dried beef. A great many limbs lay in pickle, and a great mass of money, both gold and silver, with watches, rings, swords, pistols, and a large quantity of clothes, were strewn about the cave as if of little worth. Before this treasure was accounted, His Majesty ordered that they took what human flesh they found and buried it in the sands with the proper religious rites. As for Bean's family, the king's troop reported that they had surrendered without a fight, and the head count was 8 sons, 6 daughters, 18 grandsons, and 14 granddaughters, all of whom were begotten by incest. This cursed tribe were roped and chained and paraded under strong guard through every major town on the road to their journey's end in Leith. Such were their crimes. These professed enemies to mankind were condemned to death without any due process. Sawney and his sons were castrated and had their privy members thrown into the fire. Their hands and legs were then severed from their bodies, by which wounds they bled to death. Agnes, along with her daughters and grandchildren, having been made spectators of this punishment, were afterwards burnt to death. All of them died without the least signs of repentance, but continued to the very last gasp of life, cursing and venting the most dreadful imprecations upon all present. Through all this horror, only Sawney's final chilling words were recorded for posterity.
This isn't over. It'll never be over.